it through part 1. This is part 2. Part 2 of you asking me questions and me maybe answering those questions and maybe giving you the runaround. But we got a lot more questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them all in a very concise and good way. Well, we have a Tabletopia version of the game. It seems like Tabletop Simulator is really the area where a lot of people are going to for that kind of a game, for that kind of a setup. And so I'm completely fine with creating a Tabletop Simulator version of the game and running until the game, once, in between campaign and delivery of the actual physical game, we can have a Tabletop Simulator version of the game running and run tournaments and manage our organized community. I think that's totally fine. It to me feels like it wouldn't, and I could be wrong about this. I could be wrong. I don't know how long of a, I don't know if it would be good in the long term. Maybe it would be. And I kind of defer to the community for how they feel about that. If there's a lot of interest in doing a Tabletop Simulator competitive play or organized play, then we're all for it. And it wouldn't be particularly difficult for us to import what we have on Tabletopia into Tabletop Simulator, given that all the assets are already put together. It's just more a matter of like, is that what people want? And if that's the case, then for sure. Full disclosure, there is something that we're in the works with that might solve that problem, that we will announce either mid Kickstarter or after the Kickstarter. So I'm answering that question with like there's going to be an ellipses there and like a to be continued. That may not be a satisfying answer, and sorry if it's not. This is a big one. One of my favorite games of all time is a game on the original Nintendo on NES called Star Tropics. I played that game when I was in 4th grade. I loved it. And then I continued to play it as I got older. I don't know how well it stood the test of time. It's impossible for me to know because I have such nostalgia goggles when I play that game. But that game really meant a lot to me growing up. I love, there's so many. It's just like such a, Metal Gear Solid, classic. Although I've played that game recently and the controls kind of suck. It was something I wasn't expecting. I loved that game when I first played it, and it's always been one of my favorite games. I think it's a game that is so, at the time, was so mind-blowing, and you look back on it and it's hilarious. The game is hilarious. To just look at it, you're like, this game is ridiculous. But the controls kind of suck for it. The controls aren't great. Not great controls. Kind of something it surprised me. I love Metroidvania games, and I love the Castlevania series. Those are some of my favorite games. Particularly, I love Dawn of Sorrow. I thought Dawn of Sorrow was great. The only thing I didn't like about it was the ceiling of the bosses, and that's mostly because I played it on an emulator and I had to save state like 50 times to just do the stupid seal. It was fine at the first bosses, but by the end you're making like a, you know, fractal level geometric pattern with your mouse, and you know, I was trying to do it with a mouse and not a stylus, and it was insane. But that game is fantastic. And as far as board games are concerned, I mentioned Guardians, I mentioned Rage in the previous videos. Oh my God, Final Fantasy VI, get out of here. Chrono Trigger, get out of here. Those games are amazing. Those games are stone cold classics. Oh, Mega Man X. Mega Man X is a masterpiece. That game's a masterpiece. It's the blueprint for all side-scrolling platforming games. It's perfect. That game is perfect. It doesn't do anything wrong. I have no complaints about Mega Man X. I think it's a perfect game. I can keep going. I'm not going to keep going because this video is going to be 45 minutes long if I keep talking about video games. I'm not going to talk about them anymore. We're going to move on. A lot of the game I playtest myself. And what that means is I set up a game, I set up one deck and I set up another deck, and I take turns between them. And I try to do that in a way that is the most intentional possible way. When I do that, I'm doing it with a lot of intention. And I'm usually looking for specific things. And it's more like running script in programming than it is making active decisions and trying to manipulate the game experience to be a certain thing. It's more like, what does this thing do in this situation? It wasn't until, I think, 2000 and some year that I started finding regular people to playtest with. I think it's really important to playtest with other people, especially if you are a specific kind of gamer and you like a specific play style. It's really important to get other people to look at your game. It's really important to get a wide variety of people to playtest with you. I have had people who are high-level competitive TCG players play Fable's End, and I've had people who have never played a TCG in their life play Fable's End, and both ends of that spectrum are really informative for the language that we use, the card complexity, what is working in the game, what isn't working in the game. If you wanna, the lessons that I've learned specifically about Fable's End are that if you want to get card feedback specifically, you should get people who are really experienced TCG players. If you want mechanic feedback for like the general mechanics of the game, get really inexperienced TCG players, because they'll give you honest opinions about what they think is working and what's approachable and what's not. And generally speaking, you'll want to, if you're making a game like a TCG, you want your mechanics to, the general mechanics, the general flow of the game, to be easily interpreted by a new player. And the best way to get that information is to have someone who's never played it before. And you might get really frustrated because you might be like, well, why aren't you understanding these concepts? These concepts are the same everywhere. You know, every TCG uses this exact same language, or every TCG uses the exact same turn sequence or turn structure. And they may approach that and be like, why are you doing that this way? And those questions are super valuable because we sort of take for granted how ingrained a lot of TCG turn sequence and heuristics are, where a game is designed a specific way, and the reason it's designed a specific way is because it's a derivative of this other game, and which was a derivative of another game, which is a derivative of another game, right? Like, oh, I love playing the new Digimon. Well, the new Digimon card game has a lot in common with Duel Masters, which has a lot in common with Magic. So there's this, generational passing down, or this generational inheritance of specific game traits. And it's really useful to have a complete outsider come in and just ask that question, like, why are you doing this? Why is it this way? And sometimes you don't have a good answer, and sometimes it forces you to kind of reconcile how unique and different a TCG game is compared to like a regular board game, or to compared to any other type of game. They're not always the most approachable for new people. And when we have that reflection beamed towards that game system, it can be revelatory in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you were just asking a bunch of TCG players that same question. So for playtesting, I've had a large spectrum of different people playtest the game. I've run a lot of demos with a lot of people. And when you playtest, you're really looking for just two separate things. There's, does the game work? And then do your cards work? So I've learned to separate those two categories, and the game working and the cards working are really, when they come together, it's the fruits of playtesting with a wide variety of people. I think this to me is a lot more subjective. I'm going to answer it as what makes a good TCG, or something of that genre, rather than just a card game in general. I don't think that, although I guess I could answer it both ways. I think there are some general rules for good card games, and then there are some, my personal opinions. But ultimately, I don't, this is just my opinion. I think a good trading card game really understands the boundaries of its own system, and then implements those boundaries within its card design. I think you can have a sort of so-so game system that has fantastic card design and can come out the other end of that whole design funnel a really, really wonderful, enjoyable, super dynamic, competitive game experience. And I think you can have a really compelling system that has lousy card design, or a card design that doesn't understand the boundaries of its system, and you can have a very problematic game. I've seen lots of card games come and go with innovative, fantastic systems that aren't exploited well enough by their card design. And so I think the answer, is the interplay between a great system and great card design. And those two things need to be complementary. And if they're not, you won't have a good game. I think a game doesn't work if only one of those things is firing on all cylinders. I think both have to work in tandem with one another, and they both have to understand each other. I think this is where a lot of trading card games go awry, is that they have game systems that aren't fully well understood by their card designers, and their card designers are designing cards that blow past the boundaries of the system, or aren't complementing the system in the correct way. There's a lot of really weird, unintuitive things that you sometimes have to design for card games, for cards specifically, that don't always read well, but they might play really well. And I see this a lot in games like Magic, where Magic hits on great ideas. For every 4 mechanics that they come out with, I think one of them is truly really great. And this is for each set, for each expansion that they come out with. For every 4 mechanics that expansion explores, usually one is really, really solid, and the other 3 are just duds. And generally that's because I mean, there's a lot more to that. It's you know, I'm trying to condense this idea into like one answer, and I think it's a long form, complex series of notes and observations. Um, but generally speaking, where it fails is where the cards don't understand the environment of the boundaries of the system and how to exploit that in a fun way. So to expand on this idea, you have a game system and you have card design, and when those two things are complementary, then you have a game system then you have a really compelling game. But those designs also have to be engaging, right? I think mechanically you can have this really streamlined system, and you can have this really complementary card design, and those two can fit together like, you know, it's like reading programming language. It's like reading the perfect code for an application, but the application itself isn't interesting, right? So there's that third part of it, which is once those two things are complementing each other, the outcome has to be engaging for players. And it's engaging from a lot of different angles. Is engaging from how it weaves together its flavor and its mechanics in a sort of top-down way, or how it taps into players' intuitions. And these are all like really complex notes that you can hit when you're designing card games. And I don't think every card game does it correctly, but I think the really good ones succeed more often than not. And the bad ones, generally speaking, I just, this is maybe a hot take, I actually don't think there are any real bad TCGs. There are just people that don't understand them. Like, there are very few designs in TCG that aren't viable. It's that those designs aren't optimized by their design teams, their developers. They don't understand how to optimize what they have, and so it falls short. Or there's some blunder that they're making along the way that doesn't enable the system to mature in the way it needs to in order for it to really solidify its audience. So I don't think there's very few trading card games that I've played that have been truly bad. It's more that the card design isn't matching the mechanics, or that the vision of the game is too short-sighted and isn't allowing the game to blossom into its full potential. Hey, one last thing before you click away. We are running our Kickstarter right now. We are currently live. We are on day 3. Our first 48 hours, that's the first 2 days, we raised 65% of our goal. So we're almost there. We're really close. The closer we get to our goal, the better we're going to do in the long run, and the more stuff we can share with you as the project starts growing. We have a ton of cool stretch goals that have yet to be reached, and we're really, really excited about them. So if you can, click below, go make a pledge, tell a friend.